Okay, so we talked about the heart, we talked about blood pressure, we talked about cardiovascular events. Now we're going to talk about the poor kidneys. Why? Because people love to tell me that a high-protein diet is going to crush your kidneys. Low salt is a fast track for kidney dysfunction, okay? And the kidneys in your body are freaking amazing. What do I mean by that? This is what they do every day. And those of us with normal blood pressure, 120/80 or less, right? Those of us with normal blood pressure and normal kidney function, we can easily excrete 10 times more sodium per day than we consume. Very strange, right? Because sodium and water are constantly balancing each other out. And there's constant sodium retention, there's sodium reabsorption, there's sodium excretion, okay? We're gonna talk about all this. Now, when there's more sodium in the blood, more free-floating sodium, meaning we are putting more sodium in the blood through diet, the kidneys reabsorb less and excrete more in the urine. The more that we have, the more it can excrete because it's not scarcity, right? The body keeps everything in check. On a daily basis, this filtering mechanism of our kidneys filters 3.2 to 3.6 pounds of salt per day. That's more than 150 times what we ingest per day. Yet the AHA, American Heart Association, is going to tell you 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per sodium a day is too high. It's crazy. Our kidneys filter that every 5 minutes. It's nuts, guys. Salt plays a critical role in every cellular function in the entire body. Without it, we die. We can't do anything without it, okay? So please, can we take this idea of lowering salt intake with a grain of salt? See what I did there? Boom! Nailed it. Right? That was a good one, guys. Yeah, high five. Okay, cool. Moving on. Seriously, it's actually the constant conservation and reabsorption of salt that is the biggest stress on the kidneys. That's really where we're crushing our kidneys. The low sodium intake causes it to constantly cycle and reabsorb and retain and conserve sodium. This is really, really difficult, guys. It's a tremendous caloric load as well. It's pretty crazy, like the amount of ATP it takes just for that reabsorption. 70% of the calories that your kidneys consume simply goes to filtering, reabsorbing, conserving sodium. It's insane. So the workload we're putting on the kidneys is tremendous when we don't give the body enough sodium and cause it to conserve, okay? So do your freaking kidneys a favor and supplement with some sodium. So let's talk about what low salt does in the body as a whole. Now, salt, like I said, is essential. This means it's essential for human survival. Without it, you die. The same way we talked about the body, again, regulating pH last week when we debunked the alkaline diet. The body's super good at regulating salt levels in the body. When you restrict salt intake, the body goes into full-blown panic mode because without it, it's gonna die and it knows that. So it does whatever it can to store and hold on to more salt. One of the first things the body does to retain salt is spikes insulin. This helps the kidneys retain more sodium. The spiked insulin actually sends the signals to the kidneys to start retaining more sodium. From Clovis and these 42 AMAs that you guys have now, what happens when we spike insulin levels? Fat storage, insulin resistance, eventual type 2 diabetes if high insulin remains chronic, right? That's what leads to type 2 diabetes. It's this spiked insulin. Why would we want this? So now we know that low salt leads to high insulin. Why the heck would we ever want that, right? Now, here's what happens. Women, I need to talk to you about this because I get so many messages about it. When you lower your salt intake and your insulin goes through the roof, you start to crave carbohydrates. You start to crave sugar because of the insulin spike. Why does this happen? Because as you know, when we talked about the fasting, number 25, the benefits of fasting, lowering insulin, when insulin is spiked, we cannot burn fat. If insulin levels are high in the body, we can't burn fat, right? So what happens when we spike insulin? Fat is off the table as an energy source. So what's going to happen? The body needs to create ATP at all times for every function in the body or it dies, right? So if we spike insulin and shut off access to fat, we can no longer burn fat. That means we have one energy source left that we can use to create ATP. What is that energy source? Carbs. It's the only thing you can do. It's the only fuel source you have left because insulin's through the roof, right? So the body literally makes you crave carbohydrates, so you will eat more carbohydrates so the body can access the energy and it can use the glucose to create ATP. Low sodium, spiked insulin, carbohydrate cravings. Yes, you can read through the lines and listen to me saying if you increase your salt intake, it will help you with your sugar cravings. I get messages all the time. How do I handle these sugar cravings? How do I do it? How do I do it? Right? Start salting the crap out of your food. You really can't overdo it. You're not going to get too much sodium by salting your food because the body has built-in shut-off mechanisms that it doesn't have for sugar. If you have too much sodium, the body is going to be repulsed by the taste of sodium. It does that on purpose because it's that critical for human survival. Sugar's not critical for human survival at all. So we don't have these mechanisms in place because we're not meant to get a whole bunch of it. Never before in history have we had access to this much sugar, okay? So I want to talk about the fact that hypertension is a metabolic disorder. It's been known since the 1980s that hypertension is a metabolic disorder. In particular, a state of insulin resistance. Hypertension is a state of insulin resistance. In fact, up to 80% of people with hypertension have also been found to be insulin resistant, okay? Hypertension is found to cluster in patients that have high blood glucose, high insulin, and obesity. High triglycerides, high cholesterol, all these things, right? It was even published in the New England Journal of Medicine that, quote, essential hypertension is an insulin-resistant state. Essential hypertension is an insulin-resistant state, end quote. Crazy, guys. What causes insulin resistance? Clovis Academy, I am Clovis, Clovis Kids, tell me about it. What causes insulin resistance? High carb, low fat diets. If you have even remotely high blood pressure, what is your doctor going to put you on? High carb, low fat diets with little to no salt intake. This is a metabolic death sentence, literally. It's everything that Clovis advises against. Everything. Insulin resistance. Okay? There's a direct correlation between increased body sodium and high insulin levels. Diabetics hold on to salt in their body because with that low salt diet, it goes into full-blown panic mode. And on top of that, it's going to just stack onto the obesity, the metabolic syndrome, the type 2 diabetes. Why? Because they're going to crave sugar and carbohydrates just from not eating enough salt, guys. Crazy, okay? Now, it's getting late, and I promised to talk about sex.